Alastair Newton, co-founder and director at Alavan Business Advisory, now joining us here on ET Now. Alastair, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The big story tonight around the world has to be what's Donald Trump has tweeted, confirming what the New York Times had written, that there had been an abrupt halt to a strike by United States against Iran. The big question is, clearly tensions are escalating. Donald Trump is now talking about more sanctions, bigger sanctions. So it's geopolitics that's back at the fore. You've always said that the biggest threat for the Indian economy is not the US-China trade war, but what we are seeing between the United States and Iran. Do you still hold that view?
I do, very much so, even though the reaction of oil markets to the shooting down of the drone yesterday and what we've heard on the media and through Donald Trump's Twitter feed today has actually been relatively modest. I don't regard a 1% rise in the price of crude, even following what we saw yesterday, as being anything close to the sort of overreaction which we have seen to bad news flows about Iran in the past. For example, if we go back 11 years, there was a story then which managed to put 15% on the price of crude briefly one afternoon when I remember I was in New York at the time. So far, market reaction has been reasonably modest. And let's face it, Brent crude anywhere below 70 is not particularly worrisome as far as the Indian economy is concerned. If we see more rise in tensions, more rise in the price of oil, then maybe we do need to start worrying. But right now, I would not be concerned about the price of oil today as far as implications for India are concerned. That's not to say I'm not worried about the possibility of further escalation.
So, you're pointing out and saying that further escalation is possible. We usually do see a knee-jerk reaction when it comes to such geopolitical tensions. But Alastair, look what's happening to gold. That's clearly being seen as the safest haven at the moment. So we should all brace up for gold maybe to go.
Well, I always try to avoid talking about gold prices. I have enough difficulty following what's going on in oil markets. But clearly, gold is likely to be seen as a safe haven relative to both the big geopolitical questions we have out there at the moment. And it's very important to remind investors and for investors to keep in mind that actually a week ago, despite another 2 tankers being attacked, they weren't that concerned about Iran-US. They were more concerned about US-China. Now, this week, the focus is right now, here today, clearly very much on US-Iran. But who's to say it's not going to switch back to US-China next week in the run-up to the G20 summit, when we now know that Donald Trump and Xi Jinping are actually going to meet. They're going to have an extended meeting. Hopefully, they will reach some sort of framework agreement, which has been my just better than 50% forecast since the middle of May. But there's no guarantee of that. And if things go relatively quiet in the Gulf, and with that summit coming up, I think we'll see investor attention switching back again. And there's 2 consequences of that which I think stand out. First of all, there's no reason why that shouldn't continue to be supportive of the gold price, assuming that investors do not foresee a deal. And secondly, there's no reason why it shouldn't put further downward pressure on equity markets if investors don't see the prospect of a deal. If the reverse happens, if investors think there's going to be a deal, I think you're going to see equities rally, and you almost certainly will see the oil price go up again on the basis of better prospects for the global economy. So there's these 2 forces out there, both of which need to be taken into account when we look at current market pricing and prospects.
Alastair, before I let you go, I have to ask you this because, 24 hours after this entire crisis first came to fore, we are now seeing a lot of geopolitical experts saying that, Donald Trump is already winning what you may call a silent war with Iran in the form of sanctions. Look what's happening with the Iranian economy. He's now talking about bigger sanctions, which is not good news for, let's say, other economies like India, which were dealing with Iran when it came to oil prices. So having said that, do you think that this is perhaps just, diplomacy, trying to just make it sound like, yes, there is a threat of a strike, but really just setting the stage for bigger and higher sanctions?
I don't think that Donald Trump is winning the war against Iran at this stage. I think a lot of the experts, particularly American experts, severely underestimate the resilience of the Iranian regime and the resilience of the Iranian people. This is a country where a generation ago, only a generation ago, they fought a long and ghastly war against Iraq, which cost over 1 million Iranian lives, and where civilians were targeted by the Iraqi regime and its missile strikes. I think it is entirely wrong to think that this regime is about to collapse or that it is about to come to the table. Personally, I think it's very, very unlikely indeed that the Iranians will come to the table as long as Donald Trump is president, for the very simple reason that as far as they're concerned, the great Satan, which has a bad enough record for fidelity with Iran in any case, has simply made matters worse under Donald Trump by tearing up and walking away from the JCPOA. If Donald Trump really wanted to do business with Iran, he should have stuck to the JCPOA and invited the Iranians to come back to the table to negotiate a further agreement, not to destroy an agreement with which the Iranians were in complete compliance and which had been long and hard to negotiate between the Iranians and the other partners to that agreement.
Alastair, I'm going to make this my final question. You touched upon it briefly already during this interview. Going into that big meeting of Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, we've got Mike Pompeo coming to India on the 26th of June. Do you really feel that the US and China could be on the verge of at least de-escalating the trade war?
Yes, I do. I still believe that there is a decent possibility that we could get a de-escalation in the trade war. It's not a given by any means, but a marginally better than 50% probability. And I sincerely hope that when Mr. Pompeo does arrive in Delhi, that he is given a pretty hard time over America taking India off the GSP list, which is not a friendly move at all to an ally, which actually has a very modest trade surplus with the US. This is typical of the Trump regime, I'm afraid. We saw it with Mexico a couple of weeks ago, despite the fact that they had agreed to the new NAFTA terms, where Donald Trump threatened more tariffs over immigration. And now we've seen India hit with tariffs permanently by the removal of India from the GSP list. So I sincerely hope that the Indian government will have words with Mr. Pompeo over that. It's not a way you treat allies unless you happen to be the Trump administration.
Alastair Newton, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks so much for decoding all of that, putting it all in perspective. Geopolitics, once again, and like always, dictating what we see on the global markets, crude oil prices, gold prices, bond markets, what name, I think we have a few exciting days lined up ahead. Thanks a lot, Alastair, for that.